today. You're joking. I'm glad you're surprised.
This looks promising. Nice paper-covered board, stamped with a wreath, and in here the character, Jew. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, I've seen it on there, but
do you know what it means?
No.
It means long life.
Oh, yes.
And inside, just what one would expect to find, page after page of Japanese prints. All printed in colours from wood blocks. Do you know how they're done?
Yes, each colour is put on separately.
That's right, exactly, and then printed in one go.
That's right.
And they didn't use a printing press. That's the difference between Western technology and Japan, is that they placed the paper on the carved wooden block and then rubbed it. And quite often, I don't know if we can see it anywhere on any of these, you can actually see lines, indeed you can on here, where they've scrubbled it round a bit and the line has come through. Now that's, and again in the sky, and that adds texture and excitement to it. These started being made in the 17th century in numbers, and they were the equivalent of comics of the time. Largely the populace couldn't read, which is why you don't get a lot of text to it. And they illustrate scenes from the theatre, from drama, and later on in the 19th century you even get things like the Americans and English who were resident in Japan. The colours are quite extraordinary, and they've never been seen in the West at all. The interesting thing is that once they were sort of run off, they became scrap paper, just like yesterday's newspaper. And a lot of the ceramics that came out of Japan in the second half of the 19th century arrived in Europe wrapped up in screwed up prints. And they got to, the interesting thing is they got to France and they were unwrapped. And today we're sort of kind of familiar with these, but you've got to try and place yourself in the 19th century. You have seen nothing like this at all. You've got no conception of the way the Japanese looked at life. They had a completely different spatial outlook. They weren't interested in perspective. They've got no sense of perspective at all. This scene here is of a fence with a garden, with a lady behind a screen. But it's quite flat. You don't get any idea of depth because the Japanese never discovered it. And so when these arrived in France, they were passed around the Impressionist painters, and they were absolutely, their minds were blown by these extraordinary designs. And this led on to Impressionism. Well, people don't realise quite how important they are. These are by a man called Toyokuni, who was one of the most prolific makers of prints in the 19th century. Where did you come by this album?
Well, my husband found it in a little antique shop, or it was more a junk shop than an antique shop, in Forest Hill in 1947-48.
Really?
And we paid 25 shillings for it.
A pound or so. I mean, quite extraordinary.
His interest in it was because he was interested in swords and...
oh, right. Well, we've got quite a lot of...
quite a lot of sword play in it.
Yeah.
And that's why...
The interesting thing about a Japanese book is that once you've got to the end, you move it over here,
That's it.
and you turn it over, and then it runs back the other way. So it's on both sides. So you get twice as much for your money. In fact, there is going to be about... Do you know how many there are in here?
Oh, I can't remember now. We did count at one time.
I think there are about 40 in here.
I think that's about it.
So
It's
40
about 20
times
each way.
2 is 80. I mean, the album's going to be worth 20 to 30 pounds per page.
Oh!
We're looking at somewhere around £2,500 to £3,500.
Really?
25 shillings has worked into £2,500. Not a bad buy. Thank you very much for bringing it in. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is such a good Beatrix Potter letter that I feel I have to read it all the way through. Here it is. to Bolton Gardens. Well, Bolton Gardens now is a children's playground, which I think is a rather nice thing. It starts, "My dear Marjorie, Miss Woodward sent me such a nice little letter which you had written for me, and I was so much pleased to hear about your little white bunnies. My bunnies are always brown, but I had once had a clear white rat with pink eyes, and I don't know if he wrote letters, but I think if he did, he would look like this." And there's this wonderful little picture of the little rat, and she's actually put in little pink eyes there, which I think is tremendous. And then it goes on. He was always very fond of quill pens, and once he stole a stick of sealing wax and 2 matches, and another time he put his nose into the ink bottle by mistake. So I think he must have wanted to write to you. He was very fat and lazy and spent most of his time in bed, and here it is, this wonderful pink rat again, in bed. When he was awake, he was never out of mischief, but he was so very good-tempered. I really could not scold him, not even when he ate 2 fingers off a new pair of gloves. His name was Sammy. He used to come running after me when I called him, just like a little dog. I was very sorry when he died. I've got a rabbit and a squirrel now. I bought 2 squirrels, but the one I called Nutkin, and here is a picture of Nutkin, who was much the handsomest, was so very savage I was obliged to take him back to the shop. So I only have one now called Twinkleberry. He's getting quite tame. I made a little sleeping box for him. My little bunny is sitting on the table licking my hand all the time. There's the sleeping box for the squirrel. I am writing so that I can hardly hold the pen. So good night, and you and Keith shall have another book next Christmas from yours affectionately, Beatrix Potter. And there's kisses being sent by the rabbit and the little squirrel, the squirrel Twinkleberry. Well, that's lovely. Now tell me about it. Who is it written to?
It's written to my mother.
How did you know Beatrix Potter?
My grandmother was an artist, and she had met Beatrix Potter through Miss Woodward, who was an illustrator of children's books.
Right. Well, this is written in 1903, and Beatrix Potter had really only just started on her fame, I suppose. 1902 was the date of Peter Rabbit. 1903 was Squirrel Nutkin, I think. So really, this is quite early on, and she was very generous with her time. In fact, all through her life, I think she was very generous with her time in writing to people. So this is an absolute corker of a letter. I can't say better than that. It really is an absolutely amazing letter. I have not seen one so good for a very long time, even with its envelope, which, although not valuable, is rather nice to have with it. She's become very desirable and very valuable these days. Do you have a sort of an idea?
I haven't a clue.
A ballpark where she is?
Not a
Well,
clue.
10 or 15 years ago, I'd have said that a letter like this, delightfully illustrated, will be worth somewhere in the region of £200 or £300. But nowadays, I'm afraid, so much is the taste for Beatrix Potter that a letter like this would fetch somewhere between £20,000 and £25,000 today.
You're joking.
I'm glad you're surprised. In the year 1476, Geoffrey Chaucer, who was working in Bruges at the time, moved his printing press to London, to Westminster, to within the precincts of Westminster Abbey. And there he set up a press, and he printed the first book printed in England with movable type. And that book happened to be the most important piece of Middle English literature ever written. And it was, of course, the Canterbury Tales. Now, this is not the first edition. This is not the 1476 edition. In fact, if we look at the title page, the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, newly printed with divers editions, and this wonderful armorial title page, we see, "Virtue flourisheth in Chaucer still, though death of him hath wrought his will." And the date here, 1560. So this makes it, in fact, a 5th edition of the works of Chaucer. And if we turn to the Knight's Tale, which is number 1, we have the most gorgeous woodcut illustration there. And we have this wonderful black letter, which typifies the printing of this period. And also wonderful paper, too. I don't think they made better paper. And looking through this particular copy, there are very few stains. There's very few finger marks. It's the crispest, cleanest copy that one could possibly wish for. And if I turn to the colophon right at the end here, We can see who it was printed for and the date. Here we are. Imprinted at London by John Kingston for John White, dwelling at Poole's Churchyard, anno 1561. So they started in 1560 and finished it, which is at the end, in 1561. Now the binding, again, is remarkable. Now it's lacking its clasps here, which is understandable because these often did wear off. But there is the remains here of a very fine blind stamped calf binding. Now this style of blind stamped calf came from the continent and was used not so often over here in our book decoration. The spine has, if we look at it, has been taken off and a new spine put on with the old spine laid down on top of that. But indeed, the work was done such a long time ago that it's actually splitting here. But it's a sumptuous copy. It's a prince of copies. It's very exciting. It's lovely. Now you have to tell me where your side of things come in. Where did it come from?
Well, it came from a friend of mine, and his aunt died about 6 months ago, and at the age of about 80. And John inherited this from her. And that's unfortunately about all I know about it.
So you brought it in today for him?
He was going to come today, yes, but he couldn't make it, so he asked me if I would come down.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Now, if this was the first edition of the Canterbury Tales, we'd be talking somewhere in the region of £850,000. But don't get excited, please. I only did that to wind you up slightly.
Yes, don't mind them getting round.
This is the fifth edition of the complete works of Chaucer, and in my view, books of this age and this quality are stunning value, and I estimate this not to be £850,000, but about 8,500. Yes, it's a wonderful book, and thank you so much for bringing it in.
Well, thank you very much for explaining to us. It's superb. Thank you very much.
I can't believe how bright and colourful a funeral procession is. Here is the carriage of Her Majesty the Queen and two of Her Majesty's suite, and we go on. This is so colourful. The British Army, the Highlanders, looking as bright as they possibly could. You must have kept this extremely well out of the way. And look at all this colour. It's just absolutely magnificent for a funeral service. And here, Chief Mourner, the Duke of Wellington. Well, this, of course, is the Duke of Wellington's funeral. And here is the man himself. And look at that for colour. That is the most incredible plate, isn't it?
It's fun.
You know all this is cast iron. This is all cast iron. When I was a boy, you could actually go and see this in St Paul's Cathedral, where he was buried. And so the legend goes that this was all so heavy that they couldn't get it up Ludgate Hill. He was 2 hours late for his own funeral, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing to be.
Why not?
And so it goes on. It really is absolutely magnificent. So tell me about it.
Well, I must get the right number of greats. I think it's 2 greats. Great-great-grandfather, through a friend, had a ticket somewhere on Ludgate Hill in order to see this procession. And I think I'm right in saying this was only produced about a year afterwards. It probably took quite a long time to produce it.
Absolutely.
And he bought it afterwards. I think the receipt is
Well,
actually
you see,
in the front.
You're absolutely right. I find this absolutely fascinating because I've never seen a receipt from Ackermann's before. One panorama, Duke's funeral, not Duke's of Wellington's funeral, 31 and 6.
Expensive.
I mean, that's incredible. And this note here, my father, James Passmore, saw this procession from a window in Ludgate Hill and paid 20 guineas for their seats.
That must have been a lot of money in 1852.
Well, I mean, surely you couldn't buy a house in 1852 for that sort of money. I just think it's quite incredible. It does need some repair. Inevitably, as time has gone on, it has fallen apart in a few of the folds. But it is an absolutely wonderful thing, and of course stretching out to 10 whole feet. Well, I suspect that even in the condition it's in now, it's probably about £1,500 to £2,000. But it is magnificent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can tell from the quality of the binding that they are something special. That is a wonderful quality green Morocco binding. We've probably got a binder's name in it somewhere. Yes, that's the binder's name.
Oh, fascinating.
R. Ingleton Drake binder. Now, more than that, we've got a Victoria signature here, haven't we?
Yes, we have, yes.
And this one as well?
That one as well, yes. They were two books given to my children's great-great-grandfather.
I see.
On her visit in 1889 to North Wales, and she stayed at Palais Hall, which was the family home then.
That all makes sense. They are, in fact, the famous Leaves from the Journal of Our Life in the Highlands, written by Queen Victoria, and this is more leaves from the journal. So, a sequel, as it were. Now, what we've got there is a facsimile autograph,
Yes.
and what we have over here is the real autograph.
Yes.
Now, that's a very fine inscription. It looks to me as if it's all been done by Queen Victoria. Now, that in itself is uncommon. More often than not, the inscription would have been done by a secretary, and then it was simply being signed by the Queen. But the slope of the hand, the colour of the ink, all tells me that she's done that all herself, which is most uncommon. So she obviously valued Mr. Robertson and was very pleased to have visited him. I love this as well.
That was the house, Palais, where she stayed, and it was built in, I think, the 1870s by this Henry Robertson's father, and he sadly died just before her visit. So he was the host to her. Right. And that was dinner, which looks rather good.
It does look rather good. Her Majesty's dinner, August the 24th, 1889. All in French, but if I'm correct, she ended up with creme brulee.
Very delicious.
That's very nice. That's very nice indeed. Well, these are unique. They are in remarkably good condition. What value can I put on them indeed? We've got all the right points. We've got a quality binding. We've got both volumes. We've got the complete set, as it were. We've got them both autographed, which is absolutely splendid. On the open market, 5, 6, perhaps £700. That sort of level on the open market.
So you're telling me you got all these from car boot sales?
Except for that one.
How amazing. Why do you like Ian Fleming?
Well, I don't know. The artwork on the books, it was when I started collecting the paperbacks, I just found the artwork interesting. And then after that, I started to look at the writing of Ian Fleming. When I bought this book here, I think that was about 3 years ago. And when I was reading it, I found that this guy here, James Bond, I'm not sure whether that was the inspiration for the James Bond character. And that is what I wanted to know.
That's what you want to know? Yeah. Well, James Bond was an American ornithologist.
Right.
And he'd written the field guide to the birds of the West Indies. Ian Fleming liked to go to the West Indies. Yeah. So there was a link, and Ian Fleming had read James Bond's book. Right. In a way, what he did was he just grabbed his name and he used it. After that, they got to know each other on a personal basis. And so this is a collector's item in its own right because of the connection.
I didn't realise that.
So it's very amusing. The unusual thing about the whole collection is that most of them are in just such beautiful condition.
Picking up at car boot sales, they tend to put them in cardboard boxes on damp ground, and the damp comes through. Like there's one or two. I think there's that one there.
What, Diamonds Are Forever?
Yeah, the edge went because it was in a damp box.
Yes, you can see there's a bit of damage, and that, in terms of the first edition, that makes a crucial amount of difference.
Right, okay.
And this would have been worth a few £100s, and it's probably reduced its value to more like 2 or 3 with the damage on the edges here. Dr. No's another very good one, which is now worth about £300 or £400. Altogether, on this table, excluding Casino Royale, we've probably got in excess of £2,000 worth.
Good God.
Do you know this is the first book he ever wrote?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's, from a collector's point of view, in Casino Royale, it has a tremendous premium. This is the book that, in a way, launched his career.
Right.
And it was published in 1953. If I told you it was worth a few £100s, would you be surprised?
Don't know.
What about if I told you it was worth a few £1,000?
Thousands?
Yes.
Yes, I would be a little bit shocked, actually.
You would be a little bit shocked, wouldn't you?
I would, yeah.
And if I said to you that recently it's been fetching between £5,000 and £7,000 at auction?
Never.
And you say you bought it at a boot sale?
Yeah.
Wow. Do you remember how much you paid for it?
I can't, actually. Most of the books cost between 50 pence and £1.
Well, there's a return for you.